Forget retro gaming goodness.
In the early 90s, I made that leap from our beloved 8-bit to the 16. It was the start of a whole new look and sound. This is the story of my 16-bit days. Hi, and welcome to another episode of 16-bit Days. This one is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be having a look at two different console versions or sequels to a popular flight simulation series from the 1980s. But before we start checking those out, let's go back to the 80s and check out the original. F-15 Strike Eagle was released by Microprose in 1985 and was designed by Simulation King himself, Sid Meier. The game is based on a real-life F-15 Eagle that took its first flight in 1972. It went into military service in every single mission presented in this game, all 7 including locations such as Libya, Hanoi, and the Persian Gulf, and many, many more. Strike Eagle is still one of Microprose's very early flight simulators though, so it's not quite as refined or as complicated as future entries. But what it does do, it does quite well. The game doesn't waste any time either, and it throws you straight into missions immediately, no takeoffs, just straight to the action. Choose from a mission and the difficulty level, with also an interesting arcade mode which takes most of the flight simulation aspects out and turns the game into a first-person afterburner. You have all the usual assortment of machine guns, guided missiles, and ground-based bombs to switch to as you take out enemy SAM installations and aircraft. The graphics are all done in vector style, as was the standard in a lot of flight simulators in the 80s. The game, as per Microprose standards, comes packed with an absolutely dense manual with tons of background information and all the keyboard functions needed. You'll need to check those out if you want any hope of surviving. Make sure you learn those countermeasures as well, or else your flying days will be very short-lived. It's a bit simplistic overall for a Microprose game, but it's fairly easy and quick to get into, so it's a lot more user-friendly in a sense, and definitely worth playing if you like your Sims a bit more dialed back with a lot more action. And now that we know a little bit about the original, let's jump back to one of the first console 16-bit releases. In mid-93, the Mega Drive and Genesis got F-15 Strike Eagle 2 from Microprose, kings of the flight sim style at that time. Their back catalogue of this genre is one of the best any company has ever released. Strike Eagle 2 is the sequel to the 1985 original, and the sequel was released on DOS in 1989. But this Mega Drive version is based on the updated and enhanced 1991 Amiga version. This version goes for the old-style, full-on simulation-style gameplay, with main cockpit view and multiple selectable outside views. You get to take on many missions in the usual dodgy theatre of operation that these games take place in, such as Libya, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, etc., etc. There are obviously main objectives and side missions as well to take out for bonuses. You have to deal with not only air-based attacks in the form of MiGs and other fighters, but also land-based artillery fire, warships, and enemy bases. Navigation is pretty simple, with an arrow for your main objective, which is selected, and a nifty map to jump back and forth to. With the Mega Drive controller having obviously less buttons than a standard keyboard, things have been dialed back slightly to give it a bit more of an arcadey vibe, even though it still feels overall very simulation in style. There are nifty options like a time warp feature which speeds up travel from one location to the other, and multiple difficulty settings determining whether you have to actually land or take off your plane, amongst many other factors. The graphics overall are pretty good, with both internal and outside views, and some really satisfying explosions with some good music from Matt Furness, who did many excellent Commodore 64 tunes before moving into 16-bit with some great stuff like the Alien 3 and the Terminator soundtracks. The missions are satisfying and big with plenty to do, but this game is definitely not going to be for everybody. Even though the action has been amped up a notch, it's still a slow-paced game, much like the PC or Amiga counterparts, and rewards the long play, which I really like. Overall, it's a pretty good conversion and a great continuation of the 80s original.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
And now we're going to have a look at the other 16-bit version, a lot different from this one.
In 1993, Microprose also delivered Super Strike Eagle on the Super Nintendo, giving two completely different console versions of a follow-up to the original, the Mega Drive version being more in line with the Amiga and way more simulation in style. This Super Nintendo version, however, is much more Top Gun in nature and dialing back the sim aspect dramatically. You fly your F-15 for the United Nations in this game and get sent on strike missions across the world against nations such as North Korea, Iraq, Libya, etc., etc. Each mission in their respective countries you complete means they end up joining the United Nations, as seen by their flag getting added to the UN headquarters. Missions are long and have many objectives, but play out in a really fast-paced nature, with 4 different views on display, with an overworld map-style view, making it easy to see targets and manipulate your plane in real time. The first-person view is switched to when encountering other planes, as the dogfights ensue, and the overhead bombing view, where you take out ground or sea targets by either shooting or bombing them head on, with full Mode 7 effects bringing these sequences to life, plus brief takeoff and landing third-person views. Missions are big, as mentioned earlier, but there are friendly bases that you can land at to get refueled, rearmed, as well as repaired, which gives the game an added dose of strategy to be aware of while blasting everything else, plus defenses such as chaff for incoming missiles. The missions also vary with both day and night ones, which gives the game a bit of a visual difference and some much needed variety. I really like the graphics. They are simple but work well. The Mode 7 bombing run sequences are impressive, and the excellent use of sound effects and speech samples to enhance the experience, with music only being relegated to the menus and not in-game, which works well for this style of game. Overall, it's an excellent, completely different take for this series, and a game that barely gets any mention in the Super Nintendo realms, with the constant Mario this and Mario that. This is a welcome breath of fresh air, and a very fun arcade-style version of this simulation series.
And that's it. I hope you enjoyed these console looks at a classic flight sim series. I'm Bastish B for 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can please like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.